All right. So as I understand it, you've got one couple you've already seen that you talked about in group last week, and then I think you're seeing another couple today. Is that a first session you're seeing today, or is that same couple?
It's the same one. The new one is booked for Thursday
And then
in
on
person.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then Thursday you've got your second couple. Okay,
Yeah.
great. And so you basically get to have another go at that, like that
Yeah.
25, 30 sort of session with the new couple. And yeah, wherever you want to start. I know part of today was going to be around de-escalation.
Mhm.
And yeah, but feel free to bring up like however you define that, or however you wanted to kind of get feedback around that.
Yeah. The 25, 25, 30 thing, I thought was going to be harder in the sense that I thought it was going to be hard to time, but
Mm,
I found it like actually okay to keep track of time in session. It was a bit
right.
different because that was my first time doing an 80-minute session.
Mm,
But
hmm.
Thursday will be interesting because now it'll be doing that in person rather than on Zoom or
Okay,
not Zoom, on
nice.
Doxy.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
with
So that
that,
was okay though, the amount of time like to speak with each of them. And yeah, I used to do like a full session, and then the next, whether it's the same
yeah.
week or another week, another session. But I found that having like up to 3 weeks, sometimes more, in between the individual sessions, and then everyone
Mm,
joining together, it's a lot of time. And with couples, a lot of times couples are coming in crisis, not always of course, but often, not often, a good percentage of the time. And so a lot can happen in 3 weeks, right? And also opening up that can of worms creates a higher likelihood of things to happen between them, and then not really a way to address that, right, until they're there in front of you, right? Or they address it however they're already addressing it, and that's sometimes not very ideal. So that's why I thought to do it this way. And yeah, it's worked out. I've been doing this for about 7 years, like doing it this way since about 2015, since I did my level 2 EFT. And this is one of the ways they recommend doing it, is to break it apart. And what they actually recommend is to do a full session, but then through experience, I've realized that it makes more sense to break it apart. And then I realized, you don't really need that much time with each of them. The intention is really to build that individual attachment, just to have that initial first impression be just you and them, without having the impression of the couple. That's from our standpoint. And then for them, that same thing, but also just to give them that space. And that space isn't about obviously getting everything out there, but it's just to get an initial snapshot of their view of the relationship, and what's going well, and what they think are the issues. And sometimes we get those contra indicators in there as well, so that we get to find those out before they come into the couples realm.
yeah. I've been doing a lot of reading on EFT the past week, just because I do pull from it in the like individual
Mm,
sessions, but it's different obviously with couples because you have two people there.
mhm.
And so my boss at like where I work, I just do a lot of like practice management at that job. So he also is really skilled in EFT, and he gave me like this diagram.
Nice. Yeah, yeah,
I've
that's
been
a good one.
staring at this for the past few days, like trying to like map out what I
Hmm.
already know. And
Yeah.
he gave me this other one to work through. So I was just like been doing
Oh,
homework
I know. I,
essentially.
I I know where that second one is from. It's actually
Okay.
one of my favorite books, I think, from the
Oh,
quick glance. But yeah, it's from this one.
yeah.
I have the first edition of this scanned, and then this is the second edition that they just sent me. And yeah, if you like, basically it's a workbook. It's amazing to like photocopy and give to your clients. But yeah, that figure eight, I think, is in chapter 2, and they get to fill out all their perceptions and all
Yeah.
of their, yeah. So they have different versions of it, but I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, I can
Probably
see.
blurs it, but yeah, yeah. It's sort of it gives you different versions of the cycle. So sometimes you've got like a primary cycle and a secondary cycle
Okay.
around different, yeah, so you can apply it to different circumstances, because it's not always clear cut. It's kind of nice to think of it as more than one type of cycle, because behaviors can look different, and also they can flip I know this makes it more complicated, but they can sort of flip rules depending on what kind of cycle it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Like a lot of reading to really help conceptualize, because yeah, like I've been pulling from EFT in an individual setting, but it's now like
Mhm.
bringing it together with two people and like
Yeah.
navigating that makes it challenging, but like you have to be challenged to
Mhm.
grow, so that's fine. um
True.
but yeah, so the cycle so far is looking like, um I'm not sure, because I know one of the questions here that it says that you can ask is to kind of understand the startup of the arguing, or how it, yeah, how it really begins, because really um I wasn't given much about how it starts up. Usually it's they were kind of describing the peak of the arguments and kind of dancing
Right.
around that, and there was a lot of like resentment in the room, and a lot of jabs made at each other. um
Mhm.
and so what it's looking like from what I know is that um the female partner is the withdrawer in the relationship, typically in most cases. Um, and yeah, I think now that you've described that there is like a primary and a secondary cycle, I can kind of see, because in some cases it looks like it's the other way around. But it seems
Mhm.
predominantly that the female partner is the withdrawer and the the male partner is the pursuer. And what happens is, so she'll retreat into think it's into her bed, into the bed. They don't live together, but she'll retreat into the bedroom, and then um, he tries to talk about it, and he's like making these attempts to connect with her about it, and then it pushes her even farther away. And then eventually it escalates to the point where he, I think something that I gathered from the individual portions was that he likes to throw "you're being childish" at her by retreating and not wanting to talk. And um, she said, she told me that he often describes her as disrespectful for wanting to retreat. But in her, she said that in her perspective, that he's the one who's being disrespectful because he's the one putting me down. Um, and then eventually she wants to leave. So she wants to leave to go home to her house. So she tries to leave, and he stands in the doorway. So he tries to block her, makes her more angry. So I don't know how, if she pushes him or anything, but she somehow gets out to leave, goes to the car to drive home. Um, and he's like spamming her phone, calling her about 30 times. She's like, he'll call me about 30 times. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, tell me what it looks like when you get home. And she said, well, he's still trying to contact me, and after a couple hours I'll eventually just come around. And like, I think they just argue over text or something like that. um, and that seems to be the resolution of it all. But when I interviewed the male partner, he said that, well, I was screening for safety, so I was like, have you ever felt like unsafe in this relationship, like whether it be emotionally or whether it be physically? And he said, oh yeah, absolutely. And I was like, okay, is it emotionally, physically, or both? Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that? And he says that, um, he was like, well, both. And then so I said, okay, so have you been physically harmed in this relationship? And he's like, not intentionally. So I said, can you tell me more about what you mean by not intentionally? Like, I'm unclear as to what that entails. And then he says, like, well, she throws things at me when we argue. Um, she throws things at me when we argue. She aims at my head, but she's missed every time. So he's like, I don't know what you want to do with that. And I was like, okay, like I would be really scared too, because he was like, yeah, like I'm terrified. Like, yeah, like, it can be scary. Um, and so, yeah, it's looking like, so he has 3 children, I think, with someone that's not in the relationship. And so I don't think they spend much time around both. So Sandy told me to ask about if they've been around when she's been throwing objects, because she said that's a thing you have to
Mhm.
be aware of. I don't know, it slipped my mind in the moment because I was trying to like navigate what to do with the intake.
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of where I'm stuck, because now they have to navigate the safety portion along with tracking the cycle of what's going on.
Yeah.
The way I view the cycle is that she feels, and I reflected it to her in the individual portion, like, it sounds like you feel very unheard in this relationship. And she's like, yes, like, he always talks over me. I feel like what I have to say doesn't matter, because he always talks over me. And so the way I see the figure eight is that she feels unheard. So she just gets louder and louder and louder, to the point where she has to throw something to try and get his attention, because she's trying to reach for that connection, reach to be heard. And he feels that, and like it feeds into him, because he feels like she's not listening to him because she's withdrawing. So that's where I'm at with tracking.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where would you like to start? There's a lot there, right? I mean, I think the safety piece kind of speaks for itself. I mean, I know it seems like another thing that you're trying to sort of assess for, but it really is going to be one of those things that if it comes up, it comes up, right? Like if they talk about, it's not something that I would like overtly ask about, because it sounds like even when you're asking with him, he's like, okay, well, what's the purpose? He's like dancing around answering your questions. So you have to be careful around that, because they're not going to be, if they're thinking that you're leading somewhere, they're not going to tell you what the truth is, right? Because they think you want to hear something. So if it comes up, then if there's a sense that there's children in the room, or you can maybe ask about it. I don't know how old the children are. You can kind of start there, maybe like how old are they, like, and then you can, but I wouldn't necessarily bring it up, right?
Okay.
Like a top down sort of way. But yeah, where would you like to start as far as like outside of the safety piece, or outside of the children piece?
Just kind of navigating the second session. Like, I don't really know where to like begin. I know when I was reading, it kind of talks about being walked through what a typical argument may look like, and then kind of tracking the cycle, like reflecting as you
Yeah.
go, and then
Yeah,
connecting
it
together.
it sounds like you got a good grasp of one particular event, right? I think that the next logical step is to be able to go underneath the cycle for both of them, or at least one of them in the next session, right? So
Okay.
you've got maybe not a typical event, but there's probably commonalities that you can extrapolate from even the one that you discussed, right? And there might have not been obviously time to go underneath it during that first 30-minute portion, but in a 50-minute session, especially with building off of the last session, that ought to give you enough time to be able to go underneath it for them, right? Whether you're starting at what you've already discussed, or you can start with something new, like tell me what's happened in the last week, where I like to start there, unless I already see them activated in the session, which actually makes it a lot easier as far as like diving into the cycle, because it's just right there. You can point out, oh, I noticed this and this. What's coming up for you, right? But when they're not activated, but this couple does sound like they easily get activated, so they might actually just come in and be activated, and you can just say, hey, what's coming up for you guys, right? If they're already activated, or if you notice something that's happening as you're asking questions, then you can kind of make mental notes or write down what you're noticing as far as the actual behavior, nonverbals, and then how the other person is sort of responding to it, right, or reacting to it, because that's really what's happening. But if you're going to start from the top-down perspective of asking questions, you can ask any kind of leading question that's going to get you to an entry point, right? Like you were saying in the book, it's giving you the climax, right? You don't necessarily need to start at the climax, because in the building process of the climax, you have all the leading moments up to it. And really, the climax is often just an extreme version of those moments. So it's just more of the same, because you got the more one person does one thing, the more the other person does more of the counter thing, right? So it's like cause and effect. So it just tends to get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So like criticism can turn into more criticism. It can turn into like more sharp criticism. It can turn into louder. So it really doesn't matter where you start, because what matters more is what they're able to access around that, right? Can they access what they noticed or remembered the other person was thinking, or sorry, not what the other person was thinking, what they're interpreting from what the other person was doing, right? So it's like, what's my initial appraisal of what they're trying to send to me, the energy that they're coming to me with, right? But yeah, as long as you're asking a question like, can you tell me about a situation that happened this week where there's still some activation left around it that still seems unresolved, that is typical of your, fights. And I like to create a little like wrapper, like container around how they're presenting, one, to save time, and two, to reduce the likelihood that they're going to be doing something in the session to trigger the other person. So it's kind of like some ground rules, like I'll say something like, so if you can, I know it's going to be really hard, but if you can just kind of stick to what a video camera would see. So imagine, what would a video camera see? They would just kind of see one person doing one thing, the other person doing another. So it's really just focused on your behavior, on your nonverbals, on what was said, right? How it was said, but it would leave out what one person said, like what either person's intention was, like the diagnosis of the other person, all of that stuff. If you can, just try to like stick to kind of the facts, the objective pieces of I like to use EFT language to kind of sprinkle it in there. So I might say of the dance, of the moves of the dance. However you like to use the imagery or the metaphors around it is good. You don't have to be consistent session to session. You can use different analogies for the cycle. And over time, they'll be able to come up with their own as well, right? So different couples, depending on what their cycle looks like and depending on what they're able to own, like as far as how they're able to describe it. Some couples, like they do come up with like language, like, they'll call it the pattern, they'll call it the cyclone, they'll call it like it's nice if it's a we language. So it's not like you do this, it's like itchy and scratchy, or it's this kind of thing. So it's better that it's a one word, or this kind of thing, so that it doesn't then turn into its own thing. And that way it can also be something that gets externalized, because it's like us against the pattern, us against the cyclone, right? So it's a little bit easier when you're talking about EFT, because it's meant to be non-pathologizing, and it's meant to be, the more we spend time to learn and to be open, curious about each of your stances, the easier it is for you to understand your own, you to understand the others, right? And that's what it's really all about at the end of the day, so that when you're able to get underneath it, when they're able to take a risk, the old stuff then starts to make sense. Oh, when you do this, this is what's really going on underneath, right? So then when you go back and try to kind of reevaluate it, or when they do it on their own, it's like, oh, okay, this is what you were trying to do. So it gets reframed in this way. And that's what step 4 is. It's all about reframing. And when you help integrate what they just did in a particular session, it's all about like, oh, so when you did this, it's actually this. Can you actually see that? Like, you can help over time, not necessarily always in that moment or in that session, but when you come back to it and you're kind of reevaluating, like next time when they come back and they go, oh, I used to think, or I perceive him doing this. Now when he does it, I'm kind of starting to in the moment, or at least later, be able to understand, okay, he really needs connection, or whatever it might be, right? Because of what you did last session with us, right? That's really good information to be able to assess where they're currently at, right? And when they're outside of that whole thing, when they're starting the session, sometimes they're able to be really clear about where they're at and what sort of the next baby step is, and that's where you kind of can start. But yeah, so you get the one or both of them, kind of ideally it's both of them to construct it together, but usually in the beginning it's usually one person, okay, this is what happened, and then you might lead and go, okay, do you remember this? Is this sort of adding up to you, what she's saying or what he's saying? And is anything off? Or okay, it is adding up, okay, that's good, okay, you can continue. Or do you want to say what happened next? So it's kind of like you kind of throw the ball back and forth ideally, but it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, you're just looking and waiting for that emotionally focused moment that you can really kind of sink your teeth into, because that's what's going to give you that moment is going to give you both sides of the coin. This is what happened for him, this is what happened for her, this is what you're going to use as, I've got a really good behavioral trigger for both of them, right? Like this one moment, he did this, she did that. If you have that, you don't really need to go any further. That can be your entry point, right? Boom, oh, that's for sure a trigger based on just what it was, or based on what they're telling you, or based on seeing their reaction in the moment. Yeah. So that's a good starting point usually, unless, like I said, they're kind of activated in the session.
Yeah, they came in pretty activated upon intake. So
Mhm.
Um, that was not something I expected for some reason. But I think I also just get overwhelmed because like I have like the 9 steps on the side.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
like
So
how do
just to first even
it's
just make
very
it really
overwhelming.
simple,
Yeah.
so don't worry about 9 steps. Really just
Okay.
worry about step 2 and 3. Two and
Okay.
three for the first 6 sessions is all you're going to be doing. You're going to
Okay.
be
That's
going
a
two,
lot.
three,
Yeah.
two, three, two, three, right? That's really all you're doing. And then at the end of sessions, you're doing number 4 to kind of wrap things up.
Okay. Yeah. I
That
think
just helps make it really, really simple.
yeah, I think I was very overwhelmed and thinking that like how like you're not supposed to do all 9 in one session, right? Because like that's a
Yeah.
lot to do. Um,
No. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So just focus on stage 1. You don't even move into stage 2 until like they're like graduated stage 1. So that's where in the
Okay.
beginning you're like assessing. Like stage 1 is called de-escalation.
Mhm.
Until they're de-escalated, you don't even think about stage 2. They have to be at that place where either they're not fighting anymore when they were, or you get a sense that they're really, really feeling safe to do stage 2 work, right? Maybe they're still fighting here and there, but they're able to catch themselves. They're able to really articulate, like at which point they're able to catch themselves. They're able to go back and repair when they do kind of escalate, right? So these kinds of, so it's not just these like you said in that particular, like they're texting and they just kind of let it go and they're just like rebonded, so they like don't talk about what happened, right? And then it just kind of starts up again. So that's not obviously them being ready for stage 2, right?
Mhm.
There has to be sort of like a real set, because so stage 2 is really, really risky. If one
Okay.
way to differentiate stage 1 and stage 2 is the level of risk is very, very deep. And you can't do a stage 2 enactment until you kind of have a real clear sense that the receiving partner and the transmitting partner, like they're both, so that for the transmitting partner, that the receiving partner will be able to catch them. They'll be able to give them a really good healing response. If you're
Okay.
not 100% sure that that person's going to be there to do that, you can't really go to stage 2. You kind of have to have a risk, because they're taking the kind of risk that's like a lifelong trauma sort of risk,
Mhm.
something that they've never shared with their partner before at the depth that they're going to be doing it,
Mhm.
right? So that's stage 2. And sometimes you kind of do a little bit of stage 2 in stage 1, but it's like in very small chunks. Another way to differentiate stage 1 and stage 2 is that the stage 1 risks, they're very specific to a situation, to one moment in time. Where stage 2, it's like, this is how I've always coped in my life. This is how I've felt our whole relationship, right? It's
Mhm.
not tied to this one moment in time. That's another way to differentiate it.
Okay.
But that's
That
kind of
makes sense
getting
a
ahead
lot.
of ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
So right now you're really at the point where you just want to
Yeah.
interject or go into, one analogy I like to use is like going under the hood, right? Men usually like that. And but it also makes sense. We're like going into each of yours like intra-psychic experience of what
Mhm.
happens in a particular moment. That's the stage 1 work.
Okay. That makes things a lot clearer because I was kind of looking at all the steps today and being like, okay, so I did session 1. So like which one am I supposed to be at now? But that makes things a lot clearer because like they're clearly not ready for stage 2, like at all. Um
Mhm. Mhm.
it was very
And no couple,
obvious.
no couple would be for at least 5 sessions, unless they're
Okay.
like they've already maybe seen another EFT therapist, or it's like extremely rare. I've maybe only seen it not even 1% of the time for at least
Okay.
5, 6 sessions.
Yeah, I also had an interesting um question because I spoke on the phone with Cassia. I think it was like last week because she wanted to check in with me about how my first couple session went. Um,
Hmm.
and we both have a couple where one partner is very educated in like psychology terms and like modality, and pathologizes the other partner. Like, how do you manage that in the room?
So as a generality, people that are very smart and know a lot, they become very difficult clients. That could be
Okay.
individuals or clients in a couple. I wouldn't. manage it differently than if it was any other behavior that fits within the cycle. So what
Okay.
you want to do is you fit it into the cycle, right? So it's generally pursuing behaviors
Yes.
that it would fall in there. And so whether it's like if you want to label it like the behavior of categorizing, of labeling, of rationalizing, going cognitive, these are different things that kind of somewhat similar, but if you're like diagnosing the other person, that could be both a pursuing behavior or a withdrawing behavior. It all depends on, is it proactive or is it reactive, right? So
Mhm.
generally for a pursuer, they're reacting to a withdrawer's behavior, but it's through perception. So
Ah,
a withdrawer might turn away, they might be coming home late. There's like, it's not an explicit act that they're doing. A pursuer is the one doing the more explicit. But from an EFT perspective, there's no beginning because the pursuer still perceives something. So you could say they're reacting to what they're seeing,
mhm.
right? And of course, every interaction leads to the next one as well. So there's no beginning, realistically, right? If you turn on the camera in a particular moment, that's the beginning just because you turn the camera on. So I really like the EFT is like very non-pathologizing in that sense, because you're not saying you started it or you started it, right? You're saying, well, where do you want to start? You had a trigger and you had a trigger. That's it, right? They're equal on both levels. It's just your triggers are different, right? In
Mhm.
EFT terms, your sore spots are different, right? Or your
Yeah.
raw spots, they're different, right? What you're sensitive to is different, and that's all it is.
Yeah. In my case, it was it is the pursuer who said, like, I have a family studies degree, and what did he say? I have a family studies degree, and you know about Gottman and the Four Horsemen, right? And I was like, I'm familiar. And then he's like, yeah, so she's doing this, 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 this. And I was like, okay, I can see it. Like, this is an individual portion. I'm like, I see. Um, it sounds like this, like, trying to reflect like what the underlying emotion was back to him. And in Kassia's case, it was her. I think the pursuer
Mhm.
also was saying, like, I think you're a
Yeah.
narcissist to the other
Mhm.
partner. And so,
Yeah, it's very
um,
typical. Yeah. So one thing I would say is for the individual sessions, I try to use it as it's different than a real individual session. It's an
mhm,
information gathering session, right? Because the client becomes the relationship. So I don't do many reflections, right?
mhm,
There can be situations where it's like a reflection and then quickly onto another question, but
yeah,
we don't sit with it because yeah, you're going to spend the whole session doing that, right? You're there really to find out the biggest question is, what are your goals for couples counseling so that we can have a unified goal to make sure we're on the same path, we want the same thing, right? And then what do you think from your perspective is like are the main issues in the relationship, right? And then that pursuer like that role question, how do you see yourself versus your partner? That question I really like because I get to see very quickly how they're defining like what fights actually look like. And there's not, the other person's not there in the room, so I can get a clear sense. And I can actually, when I ask that of the other person, I can see, is there agreement in that? And
mhm,
almost always there's agreement, right? Like I do more of the pursuit. And when I reflect it back, I get the validation that like, yeah, I'm doing this pursuing thing, this whatever the behavior is, and they are doing this withdrawing thing or this reactionary thing, right? So I go, oh, you're the one needing connection. Oh, you're the one needing safety. That's where it really boils down to is the withdrawer is always looking for safety in order to connect. And then the pursuer is always looking for connection, but they control the situation in order to get it, right? They're coping around it's not ideal. Um, so yeah, so if that was to come up in the session, right, I would try to link it again. How does it fit into the figure eight? So what is the other person kind of doing? If it's a coping, most likely it is. So if it's a coping, when does that come, right? When does that come up? Like when she does what, right? So link it. I always need the attachment. I always need the connection to the other person. Otherwise, we're talking about in-laws and how they're affecting our relationship. It
yeah,
doesn't work, right? It's all content. I'm very much, my ears and eyes are really just looking. So so give me an example. So what did he say? So what about Gottman? Like, give me an example of what he may have said. Like, I know this was individual,
Oh,
but just
he said that she stonewalls him.
okay, perfect. So give me an example of that. I want to know like the exact thing she did that you interpreted as stonewalling. Right.
Okay.
So now I've got what behavior was it, right? And then you perceive it as right, like as she doesn't love me, or she's sending the message that whatever it is, right? So
Mhm.
connect it to that, and then connect it to his perception of her behavior, and then connect it to like, what do you think to yourself when, right? Like, what's your, like, we call it apperception, but we don't have to make it complicated. It's just, what do you think to yourself when when you perceive your partner of X many years,
Mhm.
and I like to add those other elements because it's really important. It adds the attachment piece. So she does this thing. So let's just say she turns around, right? Let's just say that's the first thing he perceived. So she turns around, you hear, let's say, and what do you hear from that? That she doesn't want me, right? Okay, so
Mhm.
she's sending you the
Well,
message she doesn't want you, right? What do you think to yourself when you think that she doesn't want you, right? When you're hearing that message from her, oh, I'm a loser, I'm not lovable, right? It comes down to these kinds of things. I'm making it really easy for the demonstration
yeah.
purposes because they're going to make it tough, right? Especially pursuers to soften, right? But so let's just say you get to that somewhat of an emotional perception that you can go, oh, what's it like to think that to yourself? Because then
Um,
now you're going under the dotted line, right?
yeah.
Or we use the analogy of the elevator, or use the analogy
Iceberg.
of the ocean, or you're going deeper and deeper, right? And then it's just to the extent of within their window of tolerance of what they're able to allow themselves to feel in that moment with you, a stranger, and with their partner being there, right? Because that's basically where the challenge is, right?
Mhm.
But they're not looking at their partner, they're looking at you. So to the extent that you're really trying to connect and reflect back to them and provide them the space to allow them to connect to their primary experience, they're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I had a little bit of that in the like the joint portion at the end, where I asked them like, what do you guys enjoy doing together? Like what do you guys do together that like you love to do and be around each other? And he says, well, we went to that Whistler trip, or she said not fight, but he said we went on that Whistler trip and it
There
was
you go.
great
You see, she
until
wants safety.
yeah.
That's all she cares about because that's what's missing.
Yeah. No, it was very like, yeah, she didn't say much, but like she said a lot with what she did say. She's like, not fight. And then he's, well, we had a great time. Like we went to Whistler and then you did this and this, and you could see the trigger like it almost like physically, you could almost see it physically hit her or where it landed because she kind of like recoiled a little bit and um you could see her
And
just like
that's a great potential for an enactment right there. Because you
yeah,
could go,
she
oh, where he
was
said,
like,
so he said that thing, and then I noticed you doing this. Like, what
I
did you hear from that?
I kind of said to her, I was like, I noticed that you're looking down and you look a little bit tight. Like, what's going on for you? And she's like, yeah, she was flooding in like Gottman terms. Like, so she's just like, I'm just very overwhelmed because like that's not what happened from my perspective, and this, and this. And so,
So that the only thing missing there is you want to link it to what he just said.
okay.
Because
So when you heard that,
otherwise,
yeah.
yeah, right now in this room, in this moment, you heard he said this, and then right, because otherwise it's this
Hmm.
debate. Because
Okay.
really what's
That
happening
makes-
is, he did the thing that triggered her. It just happened right before. It's
okay.
not about what happened and let's figure out exactly who's right about the situation.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Cause I kind of, yeah, I just need to link it to what he said, or like right now in this moment when he says that, like what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's huge because then you can push the story from the week away, and you've got and always follow the activation. So you always follow what's there in the room because they're already experiencing it. So it's not a huge like leap to be able to allow themselves to sit with it. They're already
Mhm.
experiencing it. If you get them to then think about something else, now you're getting them to like their blood to leave their amygdala, and they're like now they're having to think about things, and that's going to take time. Why? You're already there in their amygdala. Stay there and just allow them to like name what's going on.
Mhm. Yeah, she was having a lot of trouble naming what she felt, so that'll be one to sit with. for sure, like when it does get activated,
Yeah,
even if she needs a
yeah.
while to name it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of different things you can do there. So you start first with just like what you noticed, right? So you, like for you, you noticed he said the thing, maybe it's the you statement, whatever it is, right? And then like was that the trigger? So you can start very light, like yes, no. Yes, that's the trigger. And then you can start with the head, like, so what did you interpret when he just said this? Like, what was he trying to do?
Okay.
What's his intention? Right? Okay, now I'm getting it, right? And then when you can really you're basically, what you're doing is
Breaking
you're
it
opening up, you're slowing down and making her aware of everything that happened right before, like she got triggered and flooded, right? And and that's okay. You can, even the language of like I'm flooded, that's fine, because it's, you're overwhelmed. And what you do when you're overwhelmed is you shut down, right? Or you run away, right? That's how you cope with that. That's how you protect yourself. That's how you know, recharge, whatever it might be. And then what would it be like right now to just kind of sit with what happened right before, but you have to get the perception. It's that overwhelming perception, basically. So when he said this, you took that to mean what? He's trying to hurt you, that he's attacking you is a very common one. And it's okay to say what it could be, like just give them a few things to choose from. And if they go, yeah, that's it, you're not putting words in their mouth, you're just really looking, oh, that really fits for you, right? When, because you look at their nonverbals to see if that makes sense for them, right? Especially if they're having a hard time coming up with the language. But it's easier to come up with the language than it is if you're triggered to actually express what's going on. So you
Mhm.
start with some language stuff, and then you like, so the perception of the other person's behavior, then you go, what, and then you bring it into the room. When you think that he's trying to attack you, that he's trying to hurt you, right? When you think that, right, what do you think to yourself? This is your partner of 5 years, he's trying to hurt me. What's that like to think to yourself, that he's trying to hurt me? And then now maybe some sadness can creep in, or the, like, even just touching on the overwhelm is okay, right? Because then it goes from, I see his intention, I tell myself maybe I'm not safe, here we go
Mhm.
again. Like, it's these kinds of statements that you can kind of that, you know, it's like, what's going on in your head in that moment? So he's trying to attack me, what do you tell yourself? I tell myself it's not safe, I tell myself, uh-oh. It could be very, very short, but that's the thing, you capture it. And then what's it like right now in this room to tell yourself, oh, here we go again,
Mhm.
right? That's like, oh, it's all about to come, it's all about to hit me. And then that's, no wonder you feel overwhelmed. This is exactly, you kind of validate, like, this is exactly what you would feel if you told yourself, oh, here we go again, all those past experiences of him doing XYZ, maybe even childhood stuff, whatever it might be coming up, right? But it's that, but there you're understanding the sensitivity, right? Because if it was someone else and they go, whatever, remember the trip or whatever, we had a good time, but until you did whatever, maybe it's not a big deal. But it's him, he's your attachment figure, he's the person you love, right? He's saying these things.
Mhm.
That's why it affects you so much.
Okay. No, that really helps. Yeah. Just like being able to link, like, yeah, just like connecting it to the, this is the trigger, this is what happened, this is what you
Mhm.
felt, this is what it meant to you. And then going back over and down.
Yeah.
Um,
And then you can go, and then you can, once you, it's sometimes, it's often a lot easier to start with the withdrawer, because especially if they're triggered, because it's not that hard to get to that place where I'm overwhelmed. That's a feeling, right? It's covering the underlying, maybe more primary feeling. But if that's what they're able to connect with, then you get them to do the inter part. So that's the intra part. Now it's the inter part. Now you go, wow, like what would that be? Or can you feel that right now, for example, just to confirm that what they're saying and what they're feeling is the same, right? That it's congruent. That's very important. Once you get a, yeah, I can feel it right now. And usually you can feel that they're feeling it, right? It's not them shutting down, it's them owning that they're shutting down. So there's a difference. I'm overwhelmed, right? Or I'm like feeling like I want to run away is different than them actually physically running away. They're getting in touch with that wherever it is in their body. So once you're able to go, yeah, that is what I'm feeling. What would it be like to look at him and share that with him right now? right? Connecting it again to what he does. The only thing connecting the two together is just his behavior. It's the thing that we're all there for in that moment because you were all there. But if it's the thing that even if it's a story from earlier in the week, it's the thing that they can both agree to. There's no defensiveness around, him saying, yeah, I said you did the thing. Whatever the behavior is, they both know it happened, but he's getting insight into the rest is all her owning her experience. So when you said, you blah, 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 I took that to mean that you wanted to hurt me. And then I said to myself, here we go again. And then I got really overwhelmed. So all the thing after the first is all them owning their own experience. So when you get them to turn, you're helping distill the language sometimes, especially in the beginning, because you can write it down, or you can just kind of recap it in the way that it actually makes a lot of sense to the other person. They have no idea that all this is happening, but as you're getting kind of deeper and deeper into the elevator, down the levels, they're able to see that. But it's not until you get them to share that the link is really created, that right brain to right brain connection, where they can actually see. It's not just them learning about their partner, it's that they can see that everything that was just kind of worked through is real because they're able to share it really genuinely.
Okay. Yeah, I wrote a lot
That's
down.
where the magic is. Yeah, the magic is in the enactments. If you learn about it, so I've worked with a lot of students, the number one thing that doesn't occur that stalls the therapy is not doing enactments.
So those little small snippets. Yeah.
Well, I would call them big snippets because if you end up doing, you can spend if you're in a 50-minute session, if you get to do an enactment within 10-15 minutes, you can spend the rest of the session being in that experiential state and then processing it and then wrapping it all together. So it actually becomes, if you can imagine, so if she turns to him and says, I get really overwhelmed in that moment, right? And she can share that with him, however she shares it, right? Now we check in with her and we go, what was that like to share, right? We're just helping her process that. And then, and sometimes I'm very acutely looking at them and seeing like how hard that was for them. And then being able to reflect that back, like, wow, you did it. Now I could see how hard that was. What's it like now that you've done it? You've ripped the Band-Aid off or whatever it is, you did it. And then sometimes it might be like, oh, it felt really good. Sometimes I'll be like, I'm terrified right now. Oh, okay, let's go right to the other person to see how it landed for them, because we don't want to spend too much time in this terrified state. But now I know kind of where they're at. And, and maybe if they're terrified, usually before they enact, the moment they enact, we want to go to the other person as quickly as possible, and then to understand what it was like for them to see their partner sharing in this way that's either very new or they haven't seen it in a long time, and then what it's like for them to hear their partner share in this way. And then hopefully it landed really well. And if it does land well, you check in with them and what was that like for you? And you're trying to get something primary out of them. Ideally, it's something reinforcing, reassuring, right? It makes me really sad to think that you get that the thing I did made you feel really, really overwhelmed. That's not my intention. I feel really bad. Okay, can you share that with her, right? But if he's triggered and saying something else, obviously I'm not going to get him to turn to her and share that part. You wait until you get underneath it and you kind of are digging through. It all depends on what he heard. So if he hears the wrong thing, if his focus is on what happened 5 minutes ago, because, as you were, trying to get underneath it all, she said some things that triggered him and he was lost at that point. That can happen. That's where it's really important, that peripheral vision, and to kind of see what's going on. And you'll get good at seeing, okay, the kind of things she's sharing might be triggering for him. And you can look, is that thing that she shared, or is he still with us? That's really important as well, right? And that's the kind of the art of it that you'll get, you'll eventually get over time. But even if you don't, if it doesn't land well for him and for you, she shared beautifully and it was really vulnerable, but there's a bad reaction, it's really important to try to understand, what is it that he heard? Was he there with her in the moment in the way that you were? Or did he hear something different? Maybe he heard, maybe he's stuck in the past about something that's preventing him to be present with her right now. And then you can break it down into two experiences. So you can ask him, for example, when she shared the overwhelmed part and you looked at her, I saw you were looking at her, like, or whatever you noticed, like, what was that like for you? And let's say he goes, blah, 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 it was okay, but okay, let's break this down. So there's a good part and a not so good part. So the good part, to talk to me about that part first, and we'll get to the other part, I promise, right?
Okay.
So it felt, I felt sad. I don't want her to feel that way, for example. Can you share that? And you get him to share that. That just helps her with and then you can go back to her and like, it feels good to know that's that sadness that's coming, right? Okay, now let's get to the other part. So there's something that created a mixed experience, and we want to understand what it was. Maybe it's that she threw in some other non-vulnerable part. Maybe it's he's still stuck on something from the past. Whatever it is, you can then have him, or you can either have him be able to share it, or really ideally about the non-ideal part is you are able to go back to her with some kind of explanation that it's not how she shared was really helpful. It's something else, whatever that something else that you're able to discover. Because then what's the most important part is you're reinforcing a new cycle, a new way of sharing. And then whatever didn't work, sometimes that could be good feedback as well. Because if you don't catch the bullet, meaning that's like an EFT term, if you basically allowed her to share the overwhelmed part, but it came with a jab after, it makes sense why he would have gone triggered and all he heard was the jab part, right? It makes sense. Then you have to get him to focus on the first part, be able to sit with that, share that, and then the jab part, then she goes, oh, so all I have to do is share that I'm overwhelmed and not go and you. Yeah, that's all you have to do. If you just left that part out of it, you would have been able to be there. So it's like, oh, I'm always thinking I have to share all this and justify and this and that. No, all you have to, all he needed to hear was the first part. So that's the kind of stuff you discover, like through bottom up, right? Like through them going back and forth. And over time, yeah, you can have them stop when everything they shared was vulnerable. They're about to share something that's like potentially triggering. You go, oh no, that's perfect. What you share now is perfect. You don't have to say anymore. Let's check in with you, right? And then it gets you like cut off the potential bullet, so to speak. But it's okay to have some bullets here and there. You just have to be open and curious to find out what just happened here. That's really all it is at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. So the enactments you would do more just to clarify, the enactments are part of step 2 and 3, or
3 is the enactment part.
Okay.
2 is like getting them deeper into their experience.
Okay.
And then you go 2 and 3 with each partner, right? So you go 2 and 3 and then have them share. And then part of the processing part is being able to share back, right? That's important as well, because that reinforces that how I did what I did was correct. It needs to feel like it's a reinforcing experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then in an 80-minute session, sometimes you have the ability to do enactments on both sides. Like I was saying with the coin, well, you've got the one trigger on one side, you can go back to you can dive right into, and this was your trigger, let's start here, around the same situation, right? Mm-hmm. But in a 50-minute session, generally you'll only have time to do one enactment and process that enactment. And then what I meant earlier by like tie it with a bow is just to reflect what just happened. Like, what's the process? What did we just do? We zoom out. So you, like in the example we used, so we learned about your cycle. We learned, whatever language you've already psychoeducated, whatever you've already done, you can like reuse that. Mm-hmm. And so you can think of it as a summary, but I like to think of it more as like an integration process. So you're helping them integrate and letting them know they did really good. So part of it, a lot of it is validation, like, but not validation from the perspective of like, oh my God, you did so great, but like from the perspective of like, you just took this huge step. I saw how hard it was. Be really specific. For her, you took this huge step to go into yourself and understand why your partner that you are perceiving attacked you, and you're going in and like I imagine at home, you're not going to be sharing this kind of stuff, right? But here you are, you went into it while not feeling safe to do it. And, we took this huge step to actually share that with him. And then we checked in with you and it was okay, but you really wanted to hear what it was like for him. So then we went to him and you did great as well in being able to touch in on what that was like for you. But then there was maybe some other parts that wasn't that easy. Whatever it is, you shared exactly how you perceived it. And like, wow, look at that. You were able to share and you were able to get back something that actually made you feel better. Because that's obviously the last part is, what's it like to hear that actually makes them sad to see that you're overwhelmed? Oh, actually, yeah, that helps my anxiety. I actually feel a lot better now, right? I don't feel overwhelmed anymore, or I feel a little less, or whatever it is. So you're like, look, you made that happen. You took a risk, right, to share. And oftentimes I might throw in there, like, because before we get them to risk, especially the first time, and they go and I go, what's it like to, what would it be like? It's almost like a hypothetical. What would it be like to share with him what you just shared with me?
Mhm.
And she goes, look, like, can you look at him? Just contemplate that right now. Oh, that would be too hard. No way I can do it. Okay. So it's scary. So what are you afraid would happen? Oh, he would do X, Y, Z. Okay. So you're feeling afraid that he would do X, Y, Z. Let's say he would, criticize me. Okay. So that's what you're afraid of. So how about we share that? We don't share what we talked about, right? But what would it be like instead to share, I'm afraid of sharing my overwhelm with you because I'm worried that you would criticize me or you'd laugh at me or whatever it might be, right? So you're sharing still a real primary experience, which is fear, the thing that's preventing me from being able to share, right? And if she can share the fear, that's still really good, because if he can reassure that, like he might say, I don't want you to be afraid. That's really shitty that you're afraid of me. That's the last thing I want, right? I'm whatever, right? And then that goes back to her, and then that brings her fear down. So if you have more time, maybe you get her to share. Maybe you go, wow, maybe this is what you can do, right? Or you, again, you reflect what happened, but then you can turn that into a homework assignment. Like, wow, you were able to share your fear, and he was able to let you know, like, he was able to reassure you, you felt better. So imagine you could do that at home. Do exactly what you did here. Never kind of take a bigger step than what we did here. But if you're feeling comfortable, to do what we did here, if you're feeling comfortable, because you never want to go beyond. Because what happens is, if you feel really confident, you go beyond and it doesn't work out, go back into your bubble and you go back to the old cycle. Or if you go beyond, it doesn't come off as vulnerable, because usually when we go outside our window of tolerance, it comes across as like robotic, or it'll come with our old coping, right? So we don't want that. We want it to be within our window of tolerance, but just kind of at the edge where it's a little bit uncomfortable, but not too uncomfortable. So that's the kind of like tips that you can give your clients, right? Because that's the last thing you want, because then they come in next time like, I'm never doing this again, but that's okay. That's another bullet you end up kind of having to clean up. So yeah, whatever you did in the session, you recap, right? You validate like how amazing that was, and how you take yourself as much as you can out of it. Like, you were able to take this risk. He was able to catch you. Now it's like even the cycle, right? You're creating a new cycle. You take this risk, he's able to catch you, and then you felt like you had way less fear. It's like maybe it went from a 10 to a 2 or something like that, whatever it was, right? And like I said, if there's time, you could take the risk. If not, then you can, and if it's the end of the session, you recap, like, wow, wouldn't that be amazing if you could do that at home, right?
Mm.
That kind of thing. And remember, just do what you try to do here. Right?
Cool. Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you, Ofir. There's a couple of minutes left, so if and then Anne had any like last questions they wanted to ask you, like, I'm okay. So
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't really have any questions at the moment. I'm like trying to get myself hyped up for hopefully wanting to work with couples soon.
It's a big step for sure. It's like a lot more than double, right? As you know, Esther, it's not like going from 1 to 2. It's like 1 to 10 or
it's
something.
really
like
not.
There's a lot more in the room.
Yeah, I was like, I know someone who did like the EFT training at the Vancouver Couples and Families Institute. So I was like, maybe I need to do that,
Yeah. I always volunteer with them. So we had our last group, I think 3 or 4 people from our last group. Unfortunately, they used to offer it in July, then in person, and then since COVID, they've been doing it like January, February. And I really liked how it used to be because it was 4 straight days, the externship, the level 1. And now they switched it into last year they did 2 days, and then the month after the second 2 days. I didn't like that. And then they switched it to, they took the feedback, because it is theory, but you kind of want the theory kind of all in a row in a way. So they did it 2 days, and then the next week they did the 3rd and 4th day, which was a lot better. That's what they did this year in February, but hopefully they'll bring it back to in person. It's definitely something that kind of needs to be done in person. Yeah, we have some RCCs too that did it through because a lot more organizations are offering it online, and they're all accredited with ICEF, like the Center for EFT. So you can go to any of them if you're going to do it online. But yeah, once they start offering in person, definitely I'd recommend that. What about you, Anne? Any questions at all? Anything at all? You're muted. I don't know if you're trying to talk or not.
No, I'm just kind of relating it to, family, mother and son, and having 2 people in the room at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I picked up some really good stuff today, so I'm really thankful for that. That's great.
Good. Wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you, Esther, for using your couple. And I know you've got another one coming up on Thursday. So yeah, hopefully get some value out of it. One thing that Jordan that stuck out actually was good, because I had a similar experience, is that with EFT and probably other couples modalities, as soon as you think you have a handle of it, you realize how don't, because you get another thing kind of thrown, like the monkey wrench gets thrown in, because you get confident and then something else comes up and you're like, oh man, I thought I had it handled, I thought I've seen everything. And even me, I've seen probably like 500 or 600 couples, and I still, there's new situations, new presentations of things. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good thing, because it always humbles you, right? When you run into something new. Yeah. And it never gets boring, right? That's the other thing. It always keeps you on your toes.
That's true.
Yeah. Not that individuals get boring, but hopefully you know what I mean. Yeah.
Thanks, Esther.
Well, anyways, thank you. I'll send this recording to in the practicum room as well, so that anyone else can have access to it. Thank you. We'll see you guys next time. Have a great one.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.